In DC, for DC. DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.
Welcome to Inside Style. I am your host, George Worrell, and thank you for tuning in today. Today we will be talking about dreams, entrepreneurship, and all things style. I'm going to welcome my friend, Anna Kahoe, writer, former owner of Goodwood, and all things style. Anna, thank you so much for coming. I know you don't do things like this, and we count it as a privilege and a pleasure for you to come on today. How are you?
I'm doing well, George. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah.
And while I don't normally do things like this, you know I would do almost anything for you.
Oh, you're sweet. But I appreciate it. I think you have a lot to tell us in the things that we just talked about, just mentioned. And so give us a little bit of background. I know you went to the University of Maryland. And what did you take at college?
I actually majored in speech communication, so you'd think I'd be a natural at this.
Right. Yeah.
But I think I majored in that. I really wanted to be a writer, and this is, of course, you know, pre-internet, pre-computer world almost. And I chose speech communication because I was an awful typist, and I didn't want to major in English.
Okay.
English. I wanted to tell stories, and I was afraid of the typing, so I thought I'd use my mouth instead.
Wow. And how did that play out? What was your first job after college?
My first job, well, a lot of my early jobs were retail.
Okay.
And I worked at Woodward and Lothrop, so if there are any old school Washingtonians listening, they'll remember that was like a premier D.C. department store.
Yeah. Garfinkel's and all
Raleigh's.
All of those places.
But I guess my first sort of job was outside of retail was a concierge. Yeah.
Okay, where?
I worked for a company that was called Capital Concierge.
Okay.
And it was founded by a woman, and that was exciting when I was a young woman to see entrepreneur do her stuff. And she basically approached office buildings as though they were hotels and had contracts and put concierge in the office buildings who would then, you know, make arrangements for theater tickets for all of like the clients, all the law firms and lobbying firms and.
Okay. So did you have to be outgoing and friendly and?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Were you like that?
Yes. I mean, I've always been like that. I feel like the last 2 years I've been a little more reclusive, but prior to that, I always put myself out there.
When I would come into Goodwood, you would be like, hello, you were polite and nice, but not, you know, like, hey, how you been? Like, I kind of, after you got to know you or me or whatever, we saw that. So what was that journey? How did you, you know, we want to, like, segue into getting married and what were your thoughts about that and your partner, Dan?
Yes.
How did that happen?
How did that happen? Also, you know, it's amazing when you think about sort of a early internet or pre-internet world. We met in a bar in Adams Morgan 30 years ago. We actually just last week celebrated our silver anniversary. So we've been married 25 years.
Okay.
He was a bartender. At that point, I worked in a shared office suite. It was a precursor for like a WeWork. And he was a bartender. And we bought a house in Adams Morgan. And we both loved like vintage and secondhand and thrift stores. And we bought this house. It was as is. It was ramshackled. And we worked on it for 18 months. We refurbished it. We made it beautiful.
So did you have help, or is this something?
We had a little bit of help. You know, we didn't have a contractor. I was 26 years old.
Okay.
So we were on a tight budget. But one of the things we did was Dan was starting to go to auctions. And that's kind of how we fell into Goodwood.
Okay.
And so it wasn't in that house. It was 2 houses later. So Dan and I have been together 30 years, and we just moved into our 6th house, our 6th property in D.C. Most of them not so much this last one, but most of them needed they were sort of
something
forgotten gems.
But that's the fun part about finding a gem and seeing its potential. Like, the loft that I lived in on R Street.
Yes.
Like, many times you're the only person that can see what the potential is.
Yes.
And then people come in afterwards and be like, I can't believe you did all of this.
Yeah.
Like going to your carriage house.
I mean, your place on R Street was incredible.
But it was because of the furnishings and the help. Because I remember there were so many things I didn't know. And, working in fashion and working around style and all that, there were so many things that I learned a lot about art from you all.
Yes, you had a great collection. I mean, you had the space there.
Yeah.
And I think fashion and interior design they're cousins.
But Anna Winter says that. She says
Okay.
that, the people that she hires, she asked them, what was the last museum that you went to? Or what was the last piece of art?
The last museum I went to was yesterday. I went to the Krieger Museum in D.C. It's in the Palisades neighborhood, I guess, or
Okay.
Foxhall.
Huh.
It was incredible. You should go. Talk about art collections, George. It's amazing.
Wow.
A lot of Picassos.
I've never heard of...
I know. I've
How did
lived
you
in D.C. 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Silver Spring, so
Okay.
I've always been near. It's a friend of mine took me, and it was incredible. The Krieger Museum.
How did you know that Dan was the person?
How did I know that Dan was the person? This was an early, first of all, he's a sexy man.
Right. Yeah. Aside from... Yeah.
Yes. And soulful and real. But I will tell you, early on, we were walking, and he said that he admired two types of people. He admired people who knew what they wanted to do in terms of work or career and pursued it wholeheartedly. And then the other kind of person he admired was somebody who wasn't quite sure but worked very hard at all their jobs, like in the quest.
In the journey.
And when he said it, I was like, that's me. And I realize now that that's him as well. And, so that was sort of one of the things where I was like, I bet you I can make stuff happen with this guy. I bet you we can make something happen.
Yeah, because entrepreneurship and journeys are great on your own, but if you have partnered with someone and you're on the journey together and you're both similar, and that's just such a win-win.
Yeah.
To me, to watch it, to see it, to experience it. What made you think about, what were the deciding factors about opening the amazing Goodwood on U Street?
Wow. It's funny. I say Goodwood is a real live organism, and no one owns it. We steward it. We take care of it. And actually, Goodwood, I think, has been around for probably coming on 30 years. 28 maybe. Mm-hmm. It was an existing store. Mm-hmm. Dan and I bought it. So we owned it 20 of the 30 years, let's say. It's almost 30. I'm not quite sure if it's 30. And we loved old things. Dan had been going to auctions. We were refurbishing these old houses and living them. These were not investments. These were passions. Like, we saw this house and it had great bones and it needed love, and we had love to give it. We almost didn't do it. My best friend, he's like a brother to me, Matt McHugh. He said to us, "You're crazy." They were selling the business. He's like, "You are crazy if you don't do it. This is meant for you guys." And then kind of when he said it, we knew it was true.
You trusted and you kind of started thinking about it.
And it was crazy. We had to buy it. It was like buying a piece of real estate. We had to bid on it against 4 other people. And Matt, my dear friend, he's a realtor, and he helped me structure it, the offer.
Okay.
And he used some of that real estate savvy and told me to do an escalation clause. I mean, George, we've talked about this between ourselves, but it's like, I sometimes feel like there's been, so much like destiny, so much of God's hand in my...
If something is meant to happen, it
Yes,
does.
and
Because it's hard.
Yeah, and we had to have the cash on hand to buy this business, and we were still young, we were still trying to make it, and I had done a deal that was not going to be done in time for me to pay for this business, and the owners wanted it, by a certain time, and I'm just so lucky. My friend Matt again lent us a pile of money, knowing that I was going to get paid, but it was going to be after the deal to do this building. So you said he believed in us. I mean, that's how much he believed in us. And
wow. And that's the relationships. When you start the relationships, and I'm always grateful because I would come to Goodwood and not always shop. I would come and just sit because I always thought if I go to an establishment and I could live there. Do you know what I mean?
I love that.
If I could live there, I would live there.
Yeah.
It's a good place of furniture. There's not many places that you can go that you could say that, I would live here. The way that you guys set it up as a house or a home, more so, that you can sit in different places and that you could see yourself. And then the personal touch, because Dan would deliver everything. And I remember I'd hung my artwork, and I said, "What's wrong in here?" And he took down everything and rehung it.
Amazing.
And where things should be. And I thought, oh, okay. So it was just a learning. You also you taught your client base, your friends, because people came in sometimes just to see you or to see Dan and to just chat. And
George, that is my absolute favorite compliment that we would ever get at the shop is, I wish I lived here. I mean, that's what we wanted to do. So it's warms my heart to hear you say that. And yes, I mean, you are the same way. When you love something, I mean, that's what you and I talk about all the time.
Yeah.
Remember in the pandemic when the store was closed, but you'd rap on the window and we just talk. Like kind of we're doing now. But it was about the things we loved.
The things that we loved, but and also too the encouragement, because I wrote Dyed in Wool, my book, because of you saying my love of photography and my love of old pictures and old
love
things.
of your family.
The love of my family.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I started looking at those pictures of why I became a fashion stylist and loved the style and stuff, because I was raised, when you look at these pictures with my grandparents and my mother and father, and I was like, amazing. He's like, this is a book. And I'm like, I was going to get the pictures and put them together and give them to some of my cousins. And you're like, no. This is a book. I had never thought about that.
George, I thought it was your idea. I thought it was
No.
It
was your idea. Because I was just going to do just something to put together for family, maybe for Christmas or something. But that was amazing. But more amazing is the legendary parties that I've read in the Washington Post and Washingtonian that you guys have done and probably will continue to do. Tell me about the Carriage. Is it the Carriage House?
Yeah, the Carriage House was it was a carriage house in Blagden Alley, and it was another one of these that we saw, and it was a little bit derelict, a little bit faded. But when I walked into the downstairs, I knew immediately it was perfect for having parties, perfect for entertaining, perfect for, I used to say, feasting, and you were there, and we had the long table and
the chef and we talked about Dyed in Wool at that time, and you had some food, and we sat so it was different places that you could sit.
Yes.
Then you're upstairs, but also away from the bedroom was a sitting room.
Yes.
Describe it to our...
Well, it was 2 floors. It was originally, a carriage house, so it was basically a garage for your horse and buggy. And so it was 2 floors, and we sort of saw the space as... upstairs was a private space that our bedroom and sort of living room or seating area. I had a little desk. It was sunny and bright upstairs. Downstairs was more of a public space. We had the 12-foot dining table, and then the little round table where you and I started to put together Dyed in Wool. And
And then you had the outside space is where you did your...
Where I had the party where we debuted a book that had launched. And, it was a great space for entertaining. It had so many, like you said, little moments. And it depended on if you were dining with 4 or dining with 12 or if the weather was nice and you were outside.
So as we all know the inner workings of when you are on a journey, on entrepreneurship, and just trying to make your dreams happen. And let's talk a little bit about your writing.
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you.
I didn't really know until I came to one of your essays about your friend.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I've wanted to be a writer my whole life and dabbled in and dabbled out. And then I started, probably about 8 years ago, I started taking some classes at the Writer Center, the DC Writer Center. It's actually in Bethesda. I guess it's the Washington Writer Center, but it's in Bethesda. And I had this great teacher. I still work with her sometimes, Beth Cantor, and she had a boot camp. And she had different prompts, and she asked us, we had to write about grief. And I remember a friend told me, oh, don't write about the loss of my friend Jerry, because, she said, it's too fresh, you're a new writer, you won't be good at it. But that's what came out, and I wrote this essay. It's called "It's Atmospherics," which was a favorite phrase of my friend. And it's funny you bring this up right after talking about the carriage house. He was the one who he was an interior designer. He's the one who really taught both me and Dan that creating atmosphere is important. Like, you think it's style, you think it's fashion, you think it's trends. Ultimately, it's creating atmosphere that puts people at ease, that stimulates their minds and their imaginations. And, that was the biggest lesson of my life. And I'm so grateful he was such a huge part of it. And taught me so much. And then, and then I ended up writing this beautiful piece. My teacher told me to submit it to this journal, and it got accepted, and I was stunned and amazed, and that of course was all at the beginning of the pandemic,
right.
And we could never have a live reading, and so the moment things were
lifted a little,
we had that reading in our backyard.
Yeah. What do you think was the deciding factor for his unfortunate?
Yeah, so Jerry was a super talented, super creative interior designer, just a lover of life. He suffered with depression, and that untreated, that can lead to what happened. I mean, he took his own life. He was about to be 69 years old. He's a gay man that survived the AIDS epidemic, and I think that's a trauma. And, if you also of that generation, much more difficult to live an open life. And, somebody who brought so much light and so much joy, and yet, couldn't find it for himself. Yeah. So, it's a difficult topic, and,
But I'm glad you were able to write about it, because do you feel that in your writing that whatever is in comes out and you kind of leave it?
100%.
Put it someplace,
or you process.
And it helps.
Yeah, you make sense of something that seems to make no sense, and that's exactly how I feel. I mean, I one of the other great things about it is having discussions with other people, especially other people who've had a loss like that. And you're not alone.
And also yourself, because it's very easy. And I've talked about this on the show about going through the pandemic. It was the roughest time in my life because I was experiencing things that I'd never experienced anxiety. I'd never felt like I was going to die every day.
Wow.
Or I've never felt that if I had a cold, like I took so many COVID, I would go to Bethesda. And I knew the fastest way there was a drive-through that you could go and they would swab you. And, they knew me. Hi, George. Yeah. But I thank God for my therapist, Deborah, and my doctor, because I felt like I was the only patient that they had, and they made sense of what I was going through.
Yeah.
So if that was just for a small period of time, I couldn't imagine if somebody is feeling and thinking like that for a long period of time.
Yes.
And not having any help. But that was a great trip where we were all there and we just all enjoyed it. And your writing and all of the things that you do, one would not know because you don't. Like your inner circle, probably the people know the things that you do. But your PBS special and talking about, surviving, a business surviving. How do you let's talk about that a little bit, about survival.
Yes.
Because you're a purchaser. You believe in not renting, purchasing, ownership.
Yes.
And all that comes with that. How were you able, you and Dan, to do all of that?
I mean, it was a scary time for so many people. Mm-hmm. What was hard about retail is there was no way, especially 90% of our product was secondhand. So we couldn't go from, brick and mortar to internet. It was like we couldn't even, we don't have a strong, deep, intuitive understanding of technology. I would always say, I don't want to have a website. I mean, that's like technology and shipping. I'm in this business to meet people. To be passionate about my product and teach, like you said earlier, other people about it. It was very difficult, and there were so many things happening, culturally, politically. It was a difficult time for so many people. Mm-hmm. Dan and I like to say we circled the wagons and, felt supported by so many people, including George. Your weekly visits lifted our spirits as we cleaned the store. And I mean, you'd stop in and we'd stand 12 feet apart and just share a little bit of
because they were like, we shouldn't let you in, and
and
we knew that. But it also helped me because I had to get out of the house. What was I going to do?
We were neighbors.
Yeah, because I lived up there.
You lived around the block essentially, and we talked about our families. Yeah. We talked about fashion. I mean, and it was like in the storm, it was a little bit of a moment for each other.
Also, what's next? As an entrepreneur, and if there are people out there who have worked for a long period of time and say, hey, I want to do my own thing, it's something innate that you have to, this is not for everybody. Yeah. I'm not a person who can do a 9 to 5. That has to be the same place at the same time. I've done that, and it just was not. You did it, but you also knew that you wanted to be the creator of the things that happened for you. You wanted to have a strong say about what I did, when I did it, how I did it. Yeah. Now it's a lot harder. But the rewards are so rich.
I mean, I feel like for you, this is true, George. It's like you almost can't not do that. You're young. You do the 9 to 5 or whatever it is, whatever it takes.
Funding your dreams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then at some point it's like. You're like an animal set free. You can't hold yourself back anymore. Yeah. You do it.
So with the writing and stuff, I understand that you are in a new neighborhood now.
I'm in a new neighborhood. Yeah. It's actually my original. Well, my first. Yeah, I was actually in Calorama in the early 90s when I first moved out of my parents' home. But Dan and I bought our first house 30 years ago in Adams Morgan. Mm-hmm. Dan was a bartender at, and if you're a Washingtonian, you'll recognize at Cities. It was in Adams Morgan. Dan bartended there, and his boss, the guy who owned the restaurant and bar, had an apartment above the bar. Mm-hmm. And that was many, many years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Ultimately, Dan and I bought that apartment last year, a year ago.
Wow.
So we live in Dan's old boss's apartment.
It's huge. I saw the pictures.
And Dan, I think it's Dan.
It's lovely.
As a young man working hard, thought that was an unattainable goal. And 30 years later, we're living there, loving the site, enjoying the sunshine pouring through the windows, feel so lucky. And I love Adamsburg and always have.
Yeah.
Happy to be back.
So what do you do on your off time? You're a walker. You walk everywhere. You said you
Yes.
walk.
I walk about 20, 25 miles a week. And that's another one of those things that sorts your brain out. If your brain is busy, Dan and I sold the business 2 years ago. I've been trying to focus more on writing, but I'm enjoying my life, George. I take some great trips. I went to Mexico, Italy, Spain, upstate New York, the Berkshires. I feel so fortunate.
You're happy? Are you happy?
I'm so happy, George.
Because I'm reading now Oprah, and there's a professor, I can't think of his name, The Meaning of Happiness. I think that's the title. It may be wrong, but it's her latest book.
Okay.
Because I'm not unhappy, and there are days that I'm happy, but I want to know that meaning. I want to sort through.
Yes.
Do you ever feel like, is this your time to just kind of...
This is so my time. I was telling you earlier this morning that, I'm in my mid-50s. It is not. This is not midlife. This is, I keep saying 2/3 in. I say this to my husband. We're 2/3 in. The last third, we should be smart enough to figure out living it exactly to our own terms. And I've had a very difficult decade. I lost both my parents. I lost my great friend and design mentor. Had a lot of loss, but I am motivated
to live.
And motivated to, do it right and let go of other people's input. I've had some great advisors in my life, but I'm ready to listen to myself.
Whether if it's wrong or right. And usually it's because my grandmother would say, your first mind will never steer you wrong.
I love that.
Yeah. So in finishing up, we could talk all day. What would you like to leave to our listeners? A piece of advice in writing or entrepreneurship, or what advice would you give someone that's thinking about a new career, a different career, or a career just in general? What advice would you give them? What advice would I give them? I think I'll go back to that thing that my husband said when I met him, which is like, if you aren't quite sure what you want to do, work hard until you figure it out, because that working hard, it pumps into your dream. It might feel when you're young or when you're old, it might feel like you're doing all this work for nothing. But working hard and, listen to what your grandma said, your first mind. I love it. Work hard and listen to your first mind. How can we follow you on social media? Are you on Instagram? Yes, I am on Instagram. Anna Kahoe? I'm on Instagram. I am Anna Rosa Sullivan, which is my original name. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much. George, thank you for imparting and taking the time to come. Thank you for tuning into Inside Style. I am George Worrell, and remember, real style starts with being comfortable in your own skin. We'll see you next time. For DC Radio, 96.3 HD4 and DCRadio.gov.